What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another UFL Talks. We be talking at 'em. I just wanted to say thank you for joining us today, making us a part of your day. Always a pleasure to be with you. Kind of keeping up on the league, and been a long season. Not only did we make it through a 10-week regular season, we also made it through semifinals, and of course the United Bowl. So we can, of course, now we do know who is at the top of the league. That would be Louisville Kings. Coach Redmond got the job done. Took his team 0-3 start, gets a win week 4, blows the team up, restructures, brings in, I guess, ships off his quarterback, brings in a new backup, elevates his backup to be the starter, ends up being the right decision, takes him all the way to the championship. So a lot to be proud of if you are a Louisville fan. But before we dive in too deep, wanted to just say make sure you're like, subscribe, notify. That way you can keep in the discussion. Make sure you're a part of it, as well as stay up to date on the next steps. And when we do bring our next discussion, uh, wanted to make sure that you are able to be a part as well. However, turning now back to the United Bowl, by and large, it was a pretty good time. I've not heard too many complaints so far. Of course, the quarterback play out of the defenders a little tough, but when you're down to your third, fourth string quarterback, you don't have a lot of options. So I do think, don't get me wrong, Jason Bean was good, but man, I bet Coach Harris wishes that he would have kept DeLillo because he would have had his backup throughout the rest of the season and would have done all right. Whereas he just rode pine for the Kings. But just wanted to come off first with some broad takeaways. Not so much on the team, more on the production, let's say, the broadcast. Really impressed with how ABC has been able to build their product. In the first year of the UFL 2024 and even into 2025, they were the weaker broadcast, I would say, when it came to engagement and things like that. And I think what you started to see was a strong investment from ESPN this season, at least in the latter half. And what I thought was most surprising for this year's, and I think maybe a little bit of a teaser of what we may come to expect next year, is some studio coverage for our game. So they did have a Coach Neuheisel in the I'm not sure where. I believe Bristol. I want to say could have been in LA potentially. I'm not sure where, but regardless, in studio and provided some coverage during the halftime show, as well as a little pre and post game coverage. And on that note, I think that's really where the league's heading. And I think it was worthwhile. I think it keeps fan engagement up. It's more similar to what you'd find in the NFL. And I think a lot of the fans took a warm welcome to that. And I think as you see the league start to grow, you look at that viewership doing pretty good this year and definitely doing well for the United Bowl. But expect it to start to take a larger place when it comes to spring programming. We're seeing close to 1 million viewers on most of the good games. And I'm not going to say that's, our plateau, but I will say that, like, it's highly likely that that's just kind of going to be what we see for the next few years, potentially. It's quite possible that there is a spike in viewership, especially as they bring in new markets. Expect that viewership to grow. However, most people aren't fans of every single team. They're more just fans of their own team. So that viewership may be not as distributed across the league. But those are things the league will work out. Those are more growing pains, and ultimately how things will happen. So, looking back into our champions, Louisville Kings, I thought it was an interesting game, but I do think injuries played a part in the decision. When you see Bean leave, and then you've got EJ Perry coming in, who's with the team for a week, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, not a lot of time to learn the offense. And ultimately, it came down to the defense of the Kings. They were dominant, and I'd been saying all season long how that was kind of their strong suit, and it showed out in the championship. They went down, scoop and score. That's a good performance, and it's a testament to the coaching. It's a testament to the players. It's a testament to to the team, really. The fact that, they get themselves to the championship sometimes on their offensive heels, sometimes on their defensive heels. They're a dynamic team, which I think is something that really started to develop over time. But when you are the champions, you do end up having, you're on the main stage of the UFL, the largest stage of the season. That is a spotlight on your players. So when you win the championship, don't be surprised if you lose some talent. And that may be something to be expected. But overall, when you look at the venue, I think the most exciting aspect was um, really the attendance. And when we looked into kind of what the storyline would be heading into the game, kind of the day before, Friday, Thursday, sold out tickets. And most people were hesitant whether that would be true or whether or not, you had scalpers, maybe selling them out. Most people had questions. However, you look at the game, it was one of the most well attended games the UFL's ever had. So ultimately, a lot to be said there. Just a great event for spring football. And I think a lot of foundations were built this season, especially when you get into the postseason. With the award ceremony, with the kind of fan celebration that they had, with the I'm not gonna say that it's gonna be a habit, but I would not be surprised if we saw the UFL kind of keep up the tradition of win yourself a championship, host the next year's championship. But ultimately, I would not be surprised also if the league looks around and picks a host city based on kind of who's the hottest team, hoping that the fan base shows up. So, was the league lucky that they had DC show out, and that's why they sold so many tickets because they had home field advantage? That's potential. But maybe there's also, I can almost guarantee, had it been in another city, another state, probably would have not gotten. I'm not probably not even get probably not got probably wouldn't have got half the viewership that it ended up receiving. So that is something to be excited about, especially from the league's perspective. It really worked out. It was a gamble. You put it in DC, didn't know if they'd make it. Things looked rough. They made it, got there, lost, but hey, they got there. And if you saw that beer snake, that was the largest beer snake I've seen in spring football, and it went all the way up the bleachers and then all the way across to the left, I believe, if you're looking straight on at it. Testament to the fans. I could not imagine a better environment for spring football, and I think that may be hard to duplicate, especially moving forward. Uncertainty is going to come in quite a bit. So, like, DC wins their championship. Roster pretty much stays the same. Most expected them to get back to a championship. Didn't happen that way, but ultimately that was kind of expected. Next season, is that going to be the same expectation coming off the Kings? Hard to say. Maybe they'll retain their roster. Maybe they won't. Those will be questions we'll have to see how the league shakes out, because you got to think. League just ended. We got 250 days, I'd want to say, give or take 260 days until the league kicks off again, or at least preseason activities. So in 260 days, a lot can change with the league, with the teams, with the rosters. So don't be surprised if we see a fundamentally different league next year. So it may be harder to predict what happens for, championship hosting, general preseason favorites, all of those things. We probably won't have a better idea of until we figure out how the draft or player allocation system will work, which, as it stands right now, there remain some questions. But outside of that, when you look at the general event, great venue in DC, great attendance out of the fan base. Otherwise, I think, the league was really firing on all cylinders. And honestly, I was quite impressed at the way the league pulled this together. And I think it's a testament to Repo. But when you look at the halftime show, that was a good time. A lot of fans on the field. Everybody seemed bought in. Most of those attendees stayed in during halftime, watched the performance, and I don't blame him. It was a good show. And so 50 did a good job. And I think there was a lot of excitement coming into the season, especially when it came to him. But the star of the show was the Kings, and that roster really deserved it. The defense showed out, every player contributed, and honestly, a great performance when you look at the Kings and just generally where they started and where they ended up. Almost took a worst to first approach, and at one point, I wouldn't be surprised if most of the power rankings had them either worst, second to worst. But week 4, they did kind of prove that they had that championship potential. They were the ones that sent the Renegades on their losing streak. They were the ones that sent the DC on their losing streak. They're the ones that defeated the Battlehawks in the Battle Dome. They are also the ones that defeated DC in their home field. So ultimately, they really are, roster-wise, team-wise, were a dark horse this whole season, and ultimately ended up taking the largest step they needed to. Coming into the league your first year and getting the championship, that's a strong testament, and really the city deserved it. This trophy goes home to DC. I mean, not to DC, from DC to Louisville, and depending on how things go, maybe Louisville gets another one. Maybe we see another DC Louisville rematch. These could happen. So as it stands, impressive work out of the league, and I think there's a lot to be proud of from the fan perspective, from the media perspective, from the general interest perspective. Spring football has had this persistence, and it seems right now it's in a stronger position than it's ever been, ever. And there was a chance where there was some competition with the NFL, but the UFL has really found its own lane. And don't get me wrong, there is a lot of spring football alternatives. Arena Football League, Continental Football League, European Football League, Australian Football League. There are a lot of different alternatives. So, what's the answer there? Is the UFL going to continue its dominance? I think it's likely. But the competition remains an issue for the league. When you're talking the Masters, MLB, NBA Championship, NHL Championship, the playoffs, all these things are competing against the UFL, and yet they manage to get really good attendance. So I think a lot to be optimistic about when you look at the league in relation to where it started, 3 years ago and where it is now. But when you look at the United Bowl, really an interesting dynamic. Having one of your worst teams in the first 3 weeks go on to win the championship. Maybe it was. I'm not gonna say it was a roster issue for everybody, because it's a long season. You lose your talent. People get injured. But I think the Kings just maybe made it through with less injuries, so you end up being able to compete for longer, and that was kind of the situation they were in. And honestly, if I'm a Louisville fan, I can't wait for next season. It was an exciting season. Your team is good for the most part. Most of your talent should be back. Quarterback, wide receivers, most of them should be back. So then you look at Redmond. He's probably going to be back. I mean, he might get a shot to parlay this win into, maybe a larger role somewhere else, potentially. But I fully expect him to be back. And considering this is a full-time job, you got to think off a win, you don't leave, and, you got to come back and defend your title. And I fully expect Redmond to do that. Potential that he does leave, but unlikely. Then, kind of in some other news for today, happy National Mascot Day. So did just want to kind of look around the Storm being this one. I did not know the Storm. I had not seen the Storm's mascot, but I kind of like it. I'm not gonna lie. I think it is spunky. Let's say that. At one point, there was like a cloud. Let's say a cloud, like a muscular cloud, and I think that was an Arena Football League team. But imagine that for the Storm. Aviators mascot, quite popular, I'd say. The Battlehawk, a fan favorite, flies in from the rafters. The Defenders with the snake. Kings, gotta love that. The Gamblers, okay, an Armadillo. And then the Renegade, which is just Austin Reed dressed up. Potentially. But again, I do want to just bring up again about the United Bowl. The attendance being 19,000, 20,000, it was a packed house for the DC Defenders game. And if the league could ever get to a point where it's like that every single week, oh boy, we'd be in for a very, very unique spring. Think about the attendance. If the attendance is that high, your viewership's high, sky high. So you got to think, the league's in a much stronger position. The league's in a very strong position now. So things are all up and to the right. But to kind of move back and I guess take a look back at kind of what the week was leading up to the United Bowl. Kind of the most exciting, I guess, most monumentous night was kind of the award ceremony. A couple days before the game. And that's where your Sportsman of the Year was awarded, your MVP was awarded, your Coach of the Year was awarded. So did see our MVP and Coach of the Year out of the same team end up together with for the award ceremony. And then when you look at kind of how our MVP finalists ended up shaking out, Cam Gill gets that Defensive Player of the Year. Derek Roberson, unfortunately, gets no recognition. Neither does Tomu. Most people expected Tomu wouldn't with his injury. But then looking at Plummer, kind of his race to lose, most people thought, and ultimately he ended up taking home the recognition. He is the league's MVP, surprisingly still with the Storm. More than likely will be back. Maybe not will be back, but more than likely the Storm is the only team that keeps his player rights, if that makes sense. Potentially, I suppose. There could be a shakeup, of course, but you never know. And really, I will say there was a lot to be proud for Mr. Plummer. Not only did he prove himself when it comes to running an offense, you get 3 weeks basically to come in, acquaint yourself with the offense, acquaint yourself with the team, get used to taking snaps off the center, and he was able to do it. And not only was he able to do it, he was able to do it in dominant fashion in most weeks. The times he suffered really were more team-related issues, not so much a quarterback-driven issue. Threw only a few, maybe 2 or 3 interceptions the entire season. But our Coach of the Year, Anthony Becht, and most were critical of this decision, considering he lost in the semifinals, and the last 2 years he lost in the semifinals. But I do think there's something to be said about Coach Beck's ability to bring in 50 guys, never met each other probably, don't really know each other, and then get them to compete together, get them to be a team, get them to have each other's back. That's a tough thing to do, and I think Coach Beck has a lot to be proud of in his ability to do that, because it really, really had a massive impact on his team, their performance, and they were the league leader, through most of the season. While DC was the headline, don't get me wrong, the Storm were right there in the 2 spot on everybody's list until DC started collapsing. Storms then moved up to the number 1, but they were arguably one of the better teams just from the consistency standpoint. And while DC does get injured, the fact that Coach Beck was able to get his team first year in the league back, or not just back, but into the playoffs, and put up a competitive performance in it, I think well deserved a word for Coach Beck. And we also had our Assistant Coach of the Year awarded, which was Corey Chamblin. So was kind of the architect behind the Battlehawks defense, really the reason the Battlehawks remained in a lot of their games. But not only the fact they remained in their games, but also the reason they were able to maintain a competitive advantage and keep their offense in it, because their offense struggled. We had interceptions thrown, fumbles, low yardage plays, a lot of struggles, and yet the Battlehawks defense was kind of a stable front and almost an immovable object, which most teams had to find some other workaround. But of all the coaches across the league, I think Coach Chamberlain probably has a good chance to maybe make that leap to another level, whether it be kind of a college defensive coordinator position or maybe a linebacker coach or something in the NFL. Strong potential for Coach Chamberlain. Or maybe he stays. Maybe he gets a UFL expansion. Who knows what happens? A lot can happen this offseason. Then recapping some other news out of the week heading into the championship. Morgan & Morgan was announced as a new sponsor partner of the league, and they ended up getting their logo on the flags as well as various other things across the event. So that I'm not gonna say it was a ongoing sponsorship, but what I will say is it seems they will be, or the league made a bunch of money off of their small investment, let's say. And ultimately, they call it innovating the game, but damn clever of them. Good company to partner with color wise. Then I did want to look at some of our stat leaders with punt yards starting off because we do see some specialists really get some attention when it comes into the offseason, especially moving on to the NFL. A lot of teams are looking for guys to fill gaps, so you might see a punter like Brendan Hall, Brad Robbins, Colby Wadman, all make that leap to the NFL. Then taking a look back at our field goal kickers, Tanner Brown, really leader of the league, main storyline when it came to the kicking position. Then you had John Royland, Matt McCrane. All these players will probably get some looks when it comes to the NFL. They're good talent, maybe not stay for a while, but all these kickers could get a chance with another team. Kick return yards, you got Xavier Valade, Ajin Harris, Lawrence Keys, and Eric Ezukanama. Valade, amazing performance. I wouldn't be surprised if Valade makes the leap. Ezukanama, good performer as well. Then you got punt return yards, Sean Fresh, really good performance. Antoine Wells as well. When teams are looking for pieces, they're looking for players to fit in on the special teams. They're looking for people that are good in punt return. They're looking for people that can get a couple extra yards and maybe influence a game because they get an extra first down or so. Then you look at passing yards. Plummer earned that MVP right on that 2,000 yards passing. Reed as well. Then you had Tamu, who held a good position, and McClendon, both of who ended up not playing towards the end of the season. DTR, Chandler Rogers, they climbed the rankings really fast, as well as Luis Perez. So I think all three of these players probably deserve a little more recognition than they received, at least when it came to the quarterback play. They were able to throw the ball really good. You look at Jack Plummer, he led the whole season. Chandler Rogers, Luis Perez, these DTR, they didn't have the team. They weren't quarterback for the whole season, and they ended up putting half as much yards as the MVP did. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for the quarterbacks in the UFL as it stands right now. Passing touchdowns, though, Reed kind of led that, and I think that will be his saving grace when it comes to looks from NFL teams, and he may get a chance to make that leap. They ended up losing a lot of games, and I'm not going to say he played terrible, but, there may be a shadow over the player just based on how the team was performing because he was the quarterback throughout the 6-game losing streak, which is unfortunate for the player, but at the same time, something to bounce back from next year maybe. Then we look at rushing yards, Deion Jackson, Jarvion. They were kind of battling it out this whole year, but I think Wheeler ended up being kind of the running back to watch, let's say. Ended up really developing a good relationship with the offensive line and being able to get quite a few yards. And you see Wheeler here with the touchdown, 6 rushing touchdowns, so a good performance. And then Jackson with 7. So running backs did pretty good this season. I'd say they ate. Then you look at receiving yards, Hakeem Butler, amazing performance, offensive player of the year, second offensive player of the year recognition in the UFL. Really recognizable talent on the field. Gets the ball thrown within 2-3 feet of him. He's probably going to make that catch. Then you got the receptions. 53 from Roland. Roland, kind of that safety blanket for Jack Plummer, contributing to that MVP performance. Then Jaden Mickens, really good performer as well. Tay Martin, I think, may get some looks to go on to the NFL. Then you've got Tyler Vaughns. Then receiving touchdowns, you got Emmanuel Butler, Tyler Vaughns as well. This is where I think Reed really distinguished himself because he was leading on the touchdown scores, but at the same time, really had dynamic offensive talent. So I would not be surprised if they make the leap as well. But if they don't, Austin Reed's going to come back with two of arguably some of the best weapons in the league. Maybe they trade one off, get some other talent, maybe an offensive lineman, who knows. But receiving wise, they're in good luck right now. Then you look at the tackles. You got Tay Crowder with 84, Tony Fields with 77, Tizina with 68, and then Thomas with 64. I would not be surprised if all four of these get looks from the NFL and maybe one or two ends up landing kind of a long-term contract. Sacks, Cam Gill, 10, deserves that Defensive Player of the Year recognition. Malik Fisher with 7.5 sacks. All in all, a lot of good performance when it came to our defensive players. And they really, throughout the first half of the season, were kind of the name of the game, the story, at least in the media. But looking at how the offense kind of caught up in the latter half, you saw less stories coming out of the defensive side of the ball, but still a lot to be proud of. Then you got Major Burns with the interceptions, really good performance. DJ Miller with 3, Sean Wade, Neville Clark. So interceptions a little low this season, but all in all, a good performance. Then you had your pass deflections. That's 10 out of Kerry Vincent. Then you got Sean Wade, DJ Miller. So good performance out of our players all in all. And a lot of these players ended up earning some recognition in some form. So you look at our Sportsmen of the Year. You got Alex Cook in there, Cornell Powell, Spencer Rowland, Mac Brown, the punter. A lot of good players in the league. And ultimately, the player that did take home the Sportsman of the Year recognition was Cornell Powell. And that was awarded on the award ceremony prior to the United Bowl. But you look at Cornell Powell, that's someone who really makes their presence felt, has a contribution to be made. And not everybody does. And his contribution isn't just on the field, it's off the field as well. And that's something I think you'll start to see the league do a lot more of, is that community engagement, is that outreach with the cities for which they host them. Then looking at our all UFL team, no surprises here. Offensive lineman wise, though, Gamblers having to was a little bit of a shock. Defense, you got Tyler Neville, arguably one of the better, if not best, tight ends in the league. One note on Neville, I do think there is a case to be made that Moore maybe steps into that role as kind of that best tight end, but both of which really had amazing performances this year. But wide receivers, these 3 wide receivers are kind of the stars when it comes to the passing game in the UFL. Hakeem Butler, Chris Rowland, and Tyler Vaughns. So no surprise also on our running back and quarterback position, given stat leaders, MVP recognition. But our all UFL defense team, I think, was a little more surprising. You had Bugs off the Storm, who was their only Storm player, which honestly matches up because the Storm weren't exactly known for their defense. They were more just known as an all-around decent team. But then you look at some of these other players, DJ Miller Jr. out of the cornerback for the Aviators, Mayfield Jr., cornerback for the Kings, really good performance. And I think Mayfield and Gill in the United Bowl really made their presence felt. Gill was blowing up the backfield pretty much every single play. Then you had Mayfield also getting in there, causing fumbles, causing a disruption. Then your all UFL special teams, your punter, Ryan Sanborn, Sean Fresh, I think are kind of the two. Don't get me wrong, a lot of these players will have a shot to maybe make that leap to the NFL. But the punter and punt returner, I think, have a very strong chance to be an early sign. Not only is it tough to find a decent punter, but it's also tough to find those that are talented in the return game. And when you look at Turpin and his performance with Dallas, a lot of teams are looking for a Turpin. Maybe it's a Sean Fresh this time, though. So don't be surprised if you see a lot of movement from our special teams players of the all UFL team special teams players. And we got our defensive player of the year, Cam Gill. That 10 sack performance really earned that. And ultimately, expect Cam Gill to get some looks. 10 sacks, that's a sack a game. I think there's a lot of NFL teams that take a sack a game. So maybe Cam Gill gets a shot to make that next step. But Hakeem Butler getting his Offensive Player of the Year recognition really deserved. Hakeem was on fire this year, and he's the name of the franchise, the main face, and ultimately, I think a lot of players, when they think of the Battlehawks, they think of Hakeem Butler, and I think Hakeem Butler, when he plays, there's a lot of eyes on him because the quarterback, all they have to do is throw the ball near him, and he's going to have an impact. He's going to make his presence felt. So well deserving of that Offensive Player of the Year recognition. Then our Special Teams Player of the Year, Tanner Brown. No surprise here. Making 40-yarder or 60-yarders, 40-yarders, 50-yarders, extra points pretty consistently. Only missed a few kicks this season, I think less than 5. And ultimately one of the fastest players to get signed out of the UFL, and expect him to see him this fall contributing even more. Because when you're able to make a 63-yarder, a 60-yarder at the UFL level, at the NFL level, that performance is going to get you playing time. Tanner Brown is going to be out there more than likely every single week making his name heard. Whether it be a 60-yarder, a 63-yarder, longer. Maybe he sets the record for the longest field goal. All these things could happen just based on what I've seen so far from the player. But next, we'll kind of look into the United Bowl, check out how the game really did end up shaking out. And when it came down to time of possession, well, first off, the game was close. It was close throughout. Even when you saw Bean leave the game with an injury, it was still very close. Maybe that's a testament to the offense Harris is running. But they were dominant. They played really well. It was just they could not get any points. They could not finish any drives because you look at yards, they're sitting at 319, 261 yards out of Louisville. Then play-wise, 57 to 51, so pretty equal. Yards per play, 5.6 to 5.1, pretty equal. Pass yards, 80. So that's where, the offense of the defenders relies on at least 100 yards of passing a game. So when you can't even get 60, you really start to struggle. And the Kings, they also struggled. They only got 81 yards. It was a running backs game. It was defense and the running backs. They determined this game. You look at the rushing yards on the Kings, they got 180 yards. They got more touchdowns, sure. Also got some defensive help. But the defenders, 262 yards. You needed a performance like that if you were going to win this game. So they got it out of the running backs. They just didn't get it out of their quarterbacks. And that's what happens when you get down to your fourth team, or fourth team quarterback. Then you're on your turnovers. 2 out of the Kings, terrible. And then 3 out of the defender. So you had a 1 turnover ratio, basically differential, and and you look at the score, 27 to 20. So maybe you take away that interception, you take away that fumble. Maybe the game's closer than it was. But looking at some of the bad beats, those that took the Kings to not cover the spread, fools. I understand why you wouldn't have. But then money line, they were a favorite. So most people were taking Louisville, and it was kind of the safe money. So they ended up covering. So if you took the Kings, you made the right decision. But the DC fans, which were numerous, I imagine, placed a few themselves and didn't work out so much for them. But turning now to the box score, looking at our quarterback play, you got Perry, who played most of the game after the Bean injury, but the offense had been training the last 2 weeks to be a Bean-led offense. And then you get Perry coming in there on his 3rd week with the team, you can't expect much. Throws for 50 yards, goes 5 for 12, throws an interception, which you hate to see. But all in all, Perry was getting swarmed by that Kings defense. Rodgers, though, didn't have too good of a performance himself. 81 yards, 2 interceptions, so almost a worse performance than what Bean had. But at the same time, well, one is a worse performance than Bean, but did win the game. But ultimately, I don't know that that's your, that performance in the largest game isn't the quarterback of the future. Isn't the quarterback I mean, maybe in the future, but as it stands right now, Rodgers has got a long way to go. And, both of these teams had quarterbacks playing for them that they didn't start the season with. So maybe that's a result of just how the season shook out for all the teams, but ultimately I think there is a story there to be told. Rushing, though, Wheeler, as I said, kind of one of the more impressive running back talents across the league. May get some looks to make that next step, but 10 attempts for 81 yards and a TUD, pretty good performance. Robinson, 16 for 69, was kind of carrying a larger role, but was in on some of those short yardage situations where you bring in Wheeler. Wheeler was pretty much popping them pretty good. Then you get to Valladay, who I'm not going to say is the number one running back. It's definitely Jackson. But Valladay almost has the better performance. And those that were with us on the pregame talks, I did bring up the Valladay at 2 plus 240 to score. So those that may have taken that was a pretty good one. Pretty good for those. But those also, when you look at after the week 4 win against the Renegades, the Kings were sitting at plus 2,500 odds to win the championship. So if you took those odds, you would be doing quite well right now. But you look at Perry, his main contribution was in the rushing game, not great. Also Bean, not great. Your quarterback shouldn't be running the ball so much, but they were playing against a very tough defense. Then you look at receiving, Powell for 40 yards, Ty Scott for 19. Pretty poor performance out of the passing game on both teams, and that's more a result of the defense than anything else. But Black with the 1 reception for 40 yards, really a large impact off of a rather slight performance. Winstead, 4 for 22, was kind of the main receiver this season. Then you got Lucky Jackson as well, 2 for 10 yards. So any one of these players could have broke out and had a larger performance, but the defense on both of these teams really just the passing game just wasn't there for anybody. Then you look at defense, Ellis with 6 tackles, Mayfield Jr. with 6 tackles, all UFL performer. Ja Thomas, which I think is Jihad, another 6 tackle performance. Then you look over at the defenders. One thing I'll point out, Kidd, their leading tackler, their safety, which tells you that they were getting past the first line quite frequently. And all in all, their defense, I think, this game relied on the defense, and it really came down to which team could get more takeaways, and that was the Kings. So they ended up winning the game, and that really was just how it was meant to shake out. But the game was engaging, and that game was, I'd say, one of the better games we've seen in the history of spring football, and drew eyeballs. And on that note, looking at the viewership, that game sat at about 1.6 million, which is arguably the best performance we'd seen. Earlier in the season for the Stallions versus Aviators, we did see about a 1.67 million peak viewership, but our consistent viewership was sitting about 1.6 million, which is really, really good. And then, ABC, ESPN networks, the Fox networks, they're all up 4 to 10%. So there's a lot to be impressed with. And then you look at ABC, as I said earlier, that was one of the weaker products. That's up 14%. That's a result of investment at the ESPN level. So there's a lot to be proud of for the league. Getting 1.6 million viewers, the championship, the league as a whole is starting to take hold in the fan base. And also you look at that 1.6 million viewers, you were pretty much able to watch this game anywhere in the world, whether it be Canada, whether it be America, Central America, South America, not in Africa, unfortunately, but I'm sure there was some illegal stream that could have been watched. But ESPN over there, ESPN AU, which is the Australian ESPN, and then Sports Digital in Germany. And we got some thunder outside. Oh boy. So next, looking at continuing our look at the viewership, the ESPN viewership up about 14% across the season, so really good. 8% on all the networks. So think about NFL Network, ESPN2, kind of some of the lower end channels that the games were on. That was kind of a downside for the league. Did kind of contribute, but what I think the league showed this season is, yeah, put us on NFL Network, put us on ESPN2. We're going to get you still 500,000, 600,000 views. So I think if you're the league, and I think if you're the ESPN, you got to be having conversations where you're like, all right, well, let's put these into more primetime spots. Let's put them on better networks. Let's put them in these positions where they can succeed. And you might start to see more games sitting around this 1.6 million viewership level. And as the league continues and takes hold, you're going to start to see a larger fan base because the NFL's success, every player that gets sent to the NFL, that's a league success as well. But then looking more kind of at our viewership and kind of at the season, attendance was kind of down this season, but the ratings were up. So ultimately a lot to be proud of if you're the league. Pretty much all your teams go up about 4 to 10%. Pretty good margins, at least in viewership. And that contributes to more sponsorships, more ads playing, more money coming into the league, and eventually higher salaries for the players. And one day get to a point where the UFL might be competing with NFL practice squad, contracts. And then you might start to see a lot more talent influx into the league because some guys may realize that they might have a better shot going through the NFL or UFL than going through the practice squad and hoping to get pulled up. But it'll be an interesting road ahead for the league. I don't want to say right now that this year's success is a sign of continuous success because we did see a little dip in 2025, but if things are done right, I would not be surprised that the league's able to build on this success. And on that note, Florio did kind of write us up a little article about our viewership and such. And he's very right when he talks about how the league persists. Out of all the other spring football leagues, we've not seen a stable franchise, a stable league, a stable performance. Independently, USFL, XFL did all right. But as it stands right now, what does the future look like? Is that 1.6 million the ceiling? Maybe not. Maybe that's the plateau that we hit. Maybe we sit around 1.6 million. That's still not bad viewership. You can make good money on that, especially when you bring in sponsorships, ad deals. There's a lot of opportunity for the league here, and I think they put themselves in really good position. As Florio states, the numbers ain't great. 1,900,000. But when you look at what the league often competes with in the NHL, they're sitting about 450,000 viewers. And the league consistently beats that. So maybe there's a chance for the UFL to really start to take up more market share in the spring sports window. So look ahead to that. Could be something we see more of, especially as the season starts to take shape. We got about 260 days. So as the season takes shape, once we see the schedule announced and the broadcasts announced, then we'll start to really know what the future has in store. Because if we see a shift to more premium slots, that's a good sign for the league. And that's something we'll be watching for once we get in closer to next season. But looking at attendance, we did get to the championship, and I find it funny that it's listed under the Kings, even though it was under the Defenders. But 19,000, that's great. Stadium only holds about 20,000. So when you're able to put 19,000 in DC, you're competing with St. Louis. And St. Louis has been the strong suit of the league for year over year. And yet now you start to see the Kings or the Defenders or, even the Aviators start to get, and even the Storm really start to get some competitive numbers when it comes to attendance. Kings in a better position, with their peak of the season kind of being at that 14,000 number, only 4,000 away from the floor of the Battlehawks. But you look at the Aviators, they're also sitting at 14,000. So don't be surprised if you start to see, some of these fan bases really start to pick up. And then some of these weaker fan bases, like the Gamblers, league's going to be thinking about how they can replace these with stronger markets, whether it be in Oklahoma City. Maybe it's bringing back Michigan. Maybe it's expanding on the West Coast. There's a lot of opportunity for the league. So don't be surprised if you see discussions of some shakeup heading into the season. But all in all, looking back on the season, had about 463,000 attendees. Not bad. One game gets about 600,000 viewership. So if you could get to a point where you're sitting about 1.6 million, like all in all viewers between, cable broadcast and in person attendance, the league could be in a very, very strong position. I think right now everything is up and to the right, and I expect that to continue. But I did want to turn now, take a quick look at some power rankings, kind of reflect back on the season. So we had kind of some unofficial ones going into week 10, and it's interesting to see how things shook out when we know how the playoffs would go. Seeing the Defenders make that leap from this 5 spot to the 2 spot, and the Kings make that leap to the 1 spot. And they were in the 2 on by all accounts for the most part, and it was justified. They were really one of the best teams coming into week 9, week 10, the semifinals, the week of the semifinals. And all in all, the Kings really a surprising performance and an impressive showing. Then you get into your rankings here for Mr. Ernst, the Truth. Had the Storm, had the Kings, Defenders in the 4 spot. Ended up really, really moving on to have a good position for the off season. Pardon me. Sorry about that. Oh, chat's getting lively. Tawx Tribe's in the cut. Tawx Tribe is in the cut. Chat is getting lively. Tawx Tribe, we are dealing with quite the rainstorm over here. Thunder is roaring, and but yeah, overall, looking at the season, I think our bottom half of the league, Renegades on down. A lot of questions for these teams. Aviators more, I think, franchise is stable. Stallions franchise is stable, but the Texas franchises, there might be some movement. You might see the Gamblers relocated to be San Antonio. You might see Dallas relocated. You might see Arlington come on. You might see a lot of different teams come back onto the fold, or maybe new teams altogether. But as it stands right now, Texas has some work to do. Then I want to take a look just kind of at my power rankings that I pulled together, kind of more our tiers than anything else. Look at them tabs. Tawx Tribe hates the tabs. Always does. Always hates the tabs. But anyway, looking into kind of how my perspective of the league shook out across the season. So starting off week 2, through 2 weeks, the Renegades were really leading. Storm looked good. DC looked decent. Rest of the teams looked all right. But the Kings were really down bad. And when you think of where the Kings started, they were arguably the worst team in the league, through 3 weeks. But ended up winning the championship. And then you look at the Renegades, they were one of the worst teams by the end of the season. So a lot of movement occurs within the season. And it's only 10 weeks, but you still see quite a good amount of movement. Going through week 4, it's where you start to see the Renegades stumble. The Kings still look rough. But then after this week, they ship off Jason Bean. Things start to turn around for the team. But DC, they really were coming in and they were looking like they were going to be running the league this season. And then an injury happens, and you do end up in some trouble. So week 6, you got DC Defenders reigning supreme. Week 8, though, we have no teams reigning supreme. The Storm were looking good. Kings were looking good. Stallions were looking good. Battlehawks were looking good. Most of those teams didn't end up continuing to look good. So they did struggle a little bit. But the Kings, though, really throughout the season managed to kind of climb this list, and they were almost great through 10 weeks. Then through the playoffs, they made that next leap and ended up reigning supreme. So they were the team that really, I suppose, was kind of more a shock across this season. But did want to take a turn now, look over some concerns. So first off, looking at DC. Are they going to be able to bounce back? Tough loss in the championship. It was competitive, but it was a tough loss. You got injuries across. You know, there's going to be probably some looks at your coach, maybe some poaching potentially. So how does DC bounce back next season? Are they going to be a competitor? Are they going to be back, into the playoffs next season? Those are questions we'll have to wait and see how it shakes out. But as it stands, I think I trust Coach Harris to steer the ship in the right direction. Then looking at the Stallions, is Coach McCarron coming back? Is AJ coming back? They lost this season. Are they coming back? What happens to this team, especially when you look at the attendance being under 10,000? Not great, but I think there are still some questions for the Stallions. And looking at the Aviators, I think there's going to be a coaching change. I think Ted Ginn gets the boot. Todd Haley maybe steps in, or maybe their defensive coordinator. But I expect there to be some movement there. Then the Gamblers, I think the relocation discussions are real for them. I think there's going to be a lot of people looking, how do we make this franchise more profitable? And when you're only putting up 5,000 attendees each game, there's a strong case to move you. So I am concerned at the Gamblers' relocation. They're a known franchise, but they've really struggled. Then you look at Arlington, quarterback, I think is an issue. Maybe Reed makes the move back to the NFL. Maybe you look for different talent just based on how the season went. Maybe he's lost his confidence. I don't know. But my bigger concern is Coach Neuheisel going to come back? Because I think if ESPN offers him a stadium gig, doing halftime shows, doing pregame shows, he might make that step. So don't be surprised if we see movement at kind of those crucial positions for the Renegades. Then looking at St. Louis, quarterback. Perez, yeah, he might be able to play next season, but you need a long-term option, or at least one that gives you options on offense so that you can be competitive. You should keep Frost around, but you should also look to bring in a new quarterback and see if you can get maybe some fresh blood that really can lead the offense. My concern with the Kings, our new United Bowl champions, is talent retention. You win that championship, you get a lot of eyes on you. And I think there will be a lot of teams coming calling looking for some of the Kings players. Then you look at the Storm, same issue. What's going to happen with their talent? They look good this season. And I expect Plummer to go. I expect some of the receivers to go. I expect their defense to go. Don't be surprised if we see a good amount of movement between the Kings and Storm to the NFL. So they may lose a lot of their roster. Then next, I wanted to turn over, look at some overreactions. Are the Kings a dynasty? First off, I'm going to say that's an overreaction at this point. They win one championship. They had a tough season. They only got about 7-8 wins on the season. So I think it's an overreaction, but I think there's a case to be made. When it comes to the fan base, the buy-in from the city, the coaching, the performance, if they get some better quarterback play in there, they could be a dynasty. So, but as it stands right now, I think this is a little bit of an overreaction. They win their championship. Let's see how they do next season. Maybe they are going to become one of the more consistent franchises, stronger franchises. But as it stands, I think that's looking ahead too much. Then our next overreaction is that we might see we'll see one relocation this season, which I think potential. We might see, Houston move to San Antonio, Arlington move to San Antonio. You might see, all the other teams have done pretty good so far. So I think those are really the only two teams that have faced the chance of relocation. But I think a better and stronger possibility is an expansion team this year, which would be maybe a return to Michigan or one of these other teams. And I would not be surprised if something like that happens. You could easily see, Michigan come back, or maybe a new city step onto the fold. And as it stands, there's no conference structure. You can bring one team in each year. It's not going to affect anything. You bring in one team. Yeah, sure, your league goes to 9. But ultimately, there's no conference structure. Everyone's playing against each other. And if the top 4 go to the playoffs every year, add one person, that's just another person at the bottom. So I think, and when you look, and we'll look into this a little bit more, But the league itself isn't sure that they're going to bring back all their teams. They're pretty confident, but I think the chance remains that we might see a little bit of an expansion come in. But our next overreaction is Houston had the best roster this season. I'm going to say that's an overreaction. Maybe it was a coaching issue, but they have gotten a good amount of recognition for being one of the worst teams in the UFL. So if you're the ownership of the league, it's a good look on you. But if you're the team fan base, I am concerned because the good players that you did have are now gone. So now you're starting next season in arguably a worse position because you're losing all that experience. And that experience, especially when it comes to the team building, that can be important, especially as you try to make that step, maybe to the playoffs, maybe taking a United Bowl, maybe leading the league. And Houston could get to a point like that. But as it stands, the Gamblers have kind of had a struggling position. Then our final overreaction is 50 players from the UFL making the leap to the NFL this offseason. Last 2 seasons, we saw between 40 and 60, 40 and 70, let's say. And this season, I think 50 may be high, and I think you're going to start to see more players making the leap to the NFL that have the chance to get a contract instead of just filling in on practice squads. And maybe that's a later season, later in the summer, you see those moves for practice squad. But as it stands, all these early players I expect to become rotational pieces of these NFL rosters. So watch out for them. 50, though, I think maybe an overreaction. I'd probably set the line at 40 more than likely. We'll have to check Kalshi and see what they have. But looking then back just kind of at the league, how everything shook out when it came to standings, the Kings ended up finishing off 8-4. So worse win percentage than the Storm, but ended up kind of in a better position than most thought they would at the start of the season. Defenders finish off 6-5, not great in the Battlehawks. So DC, as the standings shake out, would still be in the 4 position. Kings would be in the number 2. But ultimately, the bigger story when it comes to the standings is in the latter half. If you notice there, the Aviators, sure, they lost the most games. But the Renegades, Stallions, Gamblers, there's a lot of parity there with 4 wins. And then you look at the Defenders, they only got 1 more win than that. And then the champions of the league, the Kings, only had 6. So a lot going on there when you do look at how it ended up shaking out. And then the bigger story, though, is we have seen quite a few signings already off the league, so we'll just kind of run through them real quick. Honestly, if you look at the league's X right now, it's just all signings. So right here we've got Antoine Wells Jr., Devonta Maxwell on the defensive side, Keyshawn Banks on the defensive side. So there's Antoine Wells, Devonta Maxwell, Antrain Wells, Keyshawn Banks, Jalen Cropper, and I think Moreno Cropper, really, really good performance heading to New Orleans. A lot of players heading to New Orleans. Then you got Hunter Deckers. I think some of these weaker NFL teams are really the ones that are kind of targeting, a lot of these UFL players. So you got Columbus and Detroit. They're sitting at who is that? Tay Martin. But looking at kind of all the players getting looks right now, we're sitting at 47 players that have gotten looks so far. So 40 UFL players, 47 workouts have taken place between UFL players and NFL teams. So when we look down here at Birmingham, they're sitting at 5 players. Cooks, Clark, PV, Ross, Justin Ross getting a shot with Washington. Heck yeah. Tony Fields, no surprise, he got signed with Chicago. He really was a good performer this year and ultimately was on the Michigan Panthers. So I bet Ben Johnson had a look at him early on in the season. Then you got Dallas getting a chance. Tay Martin got to work out with Atlanta and Detroit, ended up signing with Detroit. Azukanma signs with Philly and the wide receiver position. Then you got Sean Wade signing with Philly as well. Major Burns signing with Miami. And then Jalen Cropper signing with New Orleans. Hunter Deckers surprisingly signing with New Orleans. Probably going to be their practice squad quarterback, unfortunately. And then Caden Davis. Then you got Tariq Black. So Detroit also getting into the fold here with Tariq Black and then Lucky Jackson signing both of them in the wide receiver position, maybe competing for a spot. But Tanner Brown, the star of the league, will be playing for the New Orleans Saints. So expect to see him week 1 kicking for the Saints. Hakeem Butler gets signed, ends up making the leap to Denver. Maybe we see him this season. He is a dynamic player, so you'd be foolish to not give him a shot. And then Sean Fresh, who was kind of returning a lot of those punts, a special teams player, with ends up signing with Denver. So a lot to look into there. We'll be tracking that as the season goes on. But then looking ahead, league is already looking at filling back in, kind of backfilling some of that that talent that's going to be lost to the NFL. So we'll see the Summer Showcase August 7th in Washington, D.C., August 9th in St. Louis. It'll be a good time there. And then we'll also, looking ahead, we do know we will see some expansions for 2028. Oklahoma City on pace to make that a reality. So we did see Russ Brandon out there for the groundbreaking ceremony of the new site. Then you look at, I guess, the biggest story of the league and something we'll kind of follow up on in our next coverage. Repo was talking, and they were asking if all the leagues would be back, or if we could expect some change. And Repo said there's an 80% chance the 8 markets will be back. So I would take that as about 100% chance that we're going to see some change when it comes to the markets. But he's saying 80% chance because in case he doesn't make the move and something falls through, he didn't sell us false goods. But we know Oklahoma City's coming in 2028. He's talked about New England, talked about Austin, talked about Raleigh, Queens, New York, New Mexico, Greenville. Wherever we have a successful soccer franchise, I think it's highly possible you see a UFL team move in. And I think the NFL or the New York option might be what we see more than anything else in Queens, wherever they can find a stadium to play in. Then looking at, seems we may be winding her down here. So anyway, looking ahead to what we'll have coming up for our coverage, we're going to be taking a look at the 4th and Goal series that's been coming out, kind of diving into those episodes, seeing what's come out of that, as well as taking a look into what we might have for other options, I guess, on some coverage, kind of following up on some of these NFL signings. That's going to be a big focus for us, kind of taking a look in there. But yeah, we'll be looking at 4th and Goal, diving into each episode, kind of breaking them down, pulling out what I think is kind of some of the more notable moments as well. But the big story kind of moving forward that we'll be monitoring is this potential relocation. When we know 80% chance they'll be back, 20% they won't, which means more than likely one won't, or we'll see some form of change. Don't be surprised there. But we will be keeping track of it as well as the NFL signings. So our next coverage will probably pertain to that as well as some of the 4th and Goal. But you can join us whenever that is. So make sure you are subscribed, notified. That way you can participate in the discussion whenever we do go live. And looking forward, it's been a great season. So thank you for making us a part of your day, spending some time with us. Really appreciated, and hope you continue on our journey throughout the off season into the NFL season and then back for 2027. So thanks again for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you. So thanks again for making us a part of your day. We'll catch you next time. Bye now.